Welcome to another edition of 805 Sports Talk. Now, the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about football without actually, seeing any football being played. Now we actually have some football being played that we can talk about and analyze, and it was an action-packed week 0. We were all over the Central Coast covering games, and so we got a lot to talk about this week. It's going to be an all-football show. Once again, Kenny, you had the marquee matchup of the week with Rio Grande hosting Lompoc. Everybody was really hyped up for that one, as they usually are. But clearly, that game did not live up to the hype with a big Lompoc win. Can you kind of break that one down for us?
The series after the opening kickoff was an omen of exactly how things were going to go. Rio Grande kicked the ball out of bounds. Lompoc, instead of taking the ball in 35, elected to take the penalty. They got hit with the block in the back, started on their own 13. All that meant was instead of going 65 yards for their first touchdown, they went 87 yards for their first touchdown. I actually think I expected them to look really good, and they actually exceeded my expectations by a bit. I think Lompoc just has all the components to be a very good football team. They've got a quarterback with an arm in Xavier Nix. He's got wide receivers, fast wide receivers, led by Shamar Savage, who he can get the ball to, so that loosens up the defense. They can't strictly concentrate on the run. Lorenzo, I don't know how they look to you, but my first time seeing that offensive line, they looked huge. But actually, I was most impressed with Lompoc's defense. Rio Grande went just about nowhere most of the game. They were typically quick. 3 or 4 guys to the ball. As I said, they actually exceeded my expectations a bit. Other than the 10 penalties, which Andrew Jones said we're going to need to cut down on, and some special teams play, which was lacking at times, but I think that'll be there when they really need it later in the year. They looked even better than I expected. Rio Grande, to be honest, was hit even harder by graduation than I had figured they would be. They really missed Sawyer May at the graduated quarterback.
Yeah, and I think Lompoc's defense is still perfect this season.
Yep.
Rio Grande's
the touchdown came on a James Gilmet kickoff
return. So the defense is still pitching a shutout, even though the Braves aren't overall. And they will host Nipomo on Friday night at Houck Stadium. Real quickly, Kenny, how do you think the Braves are going to do against Nipomo? Do the Titans stand a chance coming off a loss to Pioneer Valley?
Oh, I'd say a slight chance. The reason being, most teams' improvement comes from the first game, the second game. Lompoc seems to, as Andrew Jones told Lorenzo, it's true, Lompoc seems to struggle some in the second game for some reason. Then they really get rolling. I do think, though, I don't think it'll be running clock, but I still think Lompoc will win comfortably. I think they just have way too many horses for Nipomo.
Yeah, Nipomo usually finds a way to keep it close, and in fact with Lompoc, I think they went to overtime a few years ago, and they seem to always find a way to keep it close with Lompoc.
That was when Nipomo was pretty stacked, though.
Yeah, Nipomo was stacked that year. I think that might have been the year they won the CIF championship. So it may be more interesting than some might think at first glance. So Lompoc opens up its home slate Friday night at Houck Stadium against Nipomo. Last week I was at Righetti to see the Warriors start their season with an impressive win over Righetti. The score was 47-7, and of course Righetti will play at St. Joseph Friday night. That's going to be a big game, and we will webcast that game live starting at 6:45 p.m. Friday night. So Righetti's coming off a big win. St. Joseph, on the other hand, went to Sherman Oaks Notre Dame and lost by about 20 points. Talking to some of the players earlier today at the Battle for the Shield luncheon from the St. Joseph side, they feel it's good to play a really tough opponent. Even though they lost, they kind of learned some things about themselves. They learned a lot about their team coming off a loss against a really good opponent. But, Righetti does have a lot of momentum coming off a 47-7 win over Morro Bay. Morro Bay is not much of a high-caliber opponent, but, a win's a win, and to beat an opponent as soundly as they did, I'm sure Righetti has a lot of confidence. Obviously, they're motivated playing their main rival, so I don't know how that game's going to turn out yet. Righetti is probably going to be quite a bit better than they were last year. I think St. Joseph is still a really good team. They ran into a Division II team last week in Sherman Oaks, so there's not a whole lot you can take from those scores from last week entering into this week's game. They're different opponents, and anything can happen in that battle for the Shield game. So, that one's a toss-up. I'm just hoping for a close game, an exciting game. after calling the 40-point win for Righetti last week. So hopefully it's close, and hopefully Jalen Davis will make a couple of spectacular catches. He had a big one last week. That was pretty much the only thing people were talking about from that game was Jalen Davis's catch. Brandon Giddings looked, almost perfect in his varsity debut. So, I think it's going to be fun. I think Righetti might, keep it closer than what people think, even though St. Joseph has outscored Righetti something like 85-13 the last 2 games. So St. Joseph has a shield. Righetti's going to try to win it back while the Knights try to maintain possession of that shield. And that senior class at St. Joseph, who's been on varsity for the last couple of years, they're trying to go 3-0 against Righetti. So they're motivated to keep that going and not lose that streak. So a lot of motivations there from each side. It's going to be a lot of fun. I think there's going to be a ton of people there. So that's going to be my Friday night at St. Joseph, and Righetti's going to be walking over there around 6:30. They warm up on their own field and then walk over to St. Joseph usually. So that's going to be a lot of fun, a beautiful atmosphere Friday night at St. Joseph. Moving to you, Lorenzo. You were on hand for AJ Pateras' debut with Cabrillo. They hosted Bakersfield Frontier, a solid Central Section team. And I don't think things went as Pateras would have wanted to start, but I'm sure there was something good to take away from that performance. How do you think Pateras is feeling after his debut?
Well, from what I saw from this game in the press box was that there were 2 times in which Cabrillo actually could have gotten a breakaway touchdown on an aerial pass. Well, unfortunately, those were dropped wide open. So Pateras knows that this offense, when it clicks, is capable of putting up 30 points or more. The thing with a lot of rookie coaches is that usually the first game you see a lot of fundamental errors. You see a lot of missed blocks, you see penalties, and you also see some communication errors between the quarterback and receivers. But I think the one positive takeaway from this game is that Pateras saw some potential out of Sean Wood at quarterback, especially with not only his arm, but also his ability to escape the pocket when under duress. So, I'm sure Pateras is confident in his quarterback. It's just a matter of establishing confidence in not only his offensive line, but also his defense, particularly his run defense, because Frontier ran roughshod all over Cabrillo throughout the whole night.
Okay, so from all that, what do you think the best thing you saw from Cabrillo last week? What stood out the most as a biggest positive from the Conks, you think?
Definitely the air attack.
Okay.
It has potential. It's just a matter of consistency with catching the ball. And it's also a matter of consistency with blocking for Sean Wood. But I feel like that this air attack, especially considering how Pateras wants to run an up-tempo spread system, it's capable of working right away if the blocks are up front and if the receivers consistently haul in the pass.
Okay. And Elliot, you had the closest game of the week. Not too many close games from our area, but Pioneer Valley did squeak out a 13-10 win at Nipomo. I think Edgar Zacharias had a big game kicking the ball, punting the ball for them, had a good field goal that kind of seal up that win. What did you see from Pioneer Valley?
Well, both of these teams had a lot of turnover last year. Pioneer Valley had their quarterback, Matthew Garcia, back, and they also had Nicholas Robledo coming in as quarterback, and when he wasn't quarterback, he was their main running back, and of course last year he was Nipomo's quarterback, so they lost him. So Nipomo had Braden Grossart in his first varsity start. There was no running game for either of these 2 teams. Nipomo gained 58 yards on 23 carries. Pioneer Valley gained 53 yards. Robledo got 38 of those. Grossart had 170 yards through the air, but 55 of those came on one pass, a touchdown pass that got them back in the game. So this was dominated by the defenses. There weren't a lot of penalties. It was a whole lot of 1 and 0 and -1 rushing, and there was a whole lot of drop passes on both teams. The Grossart was 16 for 32 for 170. He could have easily been 20, 22, 23 for 32 because there were some wide open receivers who just dropped the ball. But he was on target, so that's got to be a good sign for Tony Dodge moving forward. And the same with Garcia and Robledo. They were throwing the ball pretty well, but their receivers just weren't catching them. And it was the first game, and they haven't practiced as much as the pros do, so Maybe just the timing isn't quite there, but there were far too many drops on both teams. So this was low scoring. There weren't a whole lot of running yards for either team. The defenses were way ahead of the offenses in this game. So what is that going to translate to? Well, Nipomo's got to go to Lompoc next week, and we were talking about how strong Lompoc is, and I don't think anybody was really surprised at how good they were. I think in that Arroyo Grande game, we were more surprised at how weak Arroyo Grande came off. Usually, even though they got a new coach and new quarterback, new faces, they find a way to score more points against Lompoc. But I don't see any hope for Nipomo without a running game. They're going to have to go to more and more passes, and defensive backs could have a field day. So I see Lompoc going to 2-0, and Nipomo praying, and Tony Dodge even said, and he's not praying, but he's looking forward to the regular league season. They want to get all the problems behind them by then. And, you know, last year they had a weak preseason and then ran the table in the league and went to the playoffs with a 4-0 record in the league. Mm-hmm. So they could do that when they get to league, but they're going to have a rough time of it getting there. And then Pioneer Valley this week goes to San Luis Obispo, and San Luis Obispo has just been weak the last few years. I think it's going to be a very similar game that Pioneer Valley is going to be able to pull out, but it's not going to be high scoring. I mean, it was 13-10. It could be 13-10 again. Mm-hmm. Right now, Edgar Zacharias is their big offensive weapon. He is just money when it comes to kicking those field goals. He went out there and kicked a 47-yard field goal that could have gone 57. I mean, he had a lot of leg in that thing. It cleared the end zone. It not only cleared the uprights, it cleared everything. It was out in the dirt. No nerves, no nothing. He just stepped into that ball and let it go. And he also kicked a field goal, a shorter one, earlier in the game to give him put him up 10-7. So they may be relying on him, but I can see Zacharias being the reason they beat San Luis Obispo. Slow's a little bit improved, but they're still struggling. So it's going to be a close game. But again, preseason, so. Coach Ruiz, John Ruiz over at Pioneer Valley's got to figure out how to work in both of his quarterbacks, and he keeps Robledo on the field. I think he's got a golden opportunity to do some pitches, from Garcia to Robledo, and then Robledo pulls up and throws it. He didn't try any of those plays. It was all pretty much straightforward football. When Robledo was in the backfield as a running back, he ran the ball. When he was in the backfield as a quarterback, he threw the ball. I mean, he actually threw more passes than Garcia. He threw 14. Garcia only threw 8. So I think Ruiz has more options at quarterback this year than he's had in the past, and we'll see how he uses them down the road. But I don't see San Luis Obispo being able to stand up against, one, the Pioneer Valley defense, and two, Edgar Zacharias. He can kick them from midfield. Yeah. That kid is so good.
I got to pat myself on the back for that. In my Central Coast 60 ranking of the top returning players, I had Zacharias, I think, like 19th or something like that. You usually wouldn't see a kicker or punter rated that highly, but I think he was money last year, and it sounds like he's going to be money again this year. So he's got a big leg and he's accurate. He can also punt. So, we love to give even the kickers and punters around here, enough credit for what they do. And it's great that you caught that.
Yeah,
that he had a big game.
I said last week this could be the closest game, and it was. And I had the one where you were really on the edge of your seat, because even after Pioneer Valley went up, there was still 8.5 minutes or so to go in the game, at 8:21, and Nipomo had its chances. They just couldn't close out any of their offensive drives after that. So kudos to the defenses on both teams. But Tony Dodge and Nipomo have to figure out how to move that ball down the field a little better. Of course, it was Grossart's first game as a varsity quarterback, so I'm sure he'll get more comfortable under center or in the shotgun as the weeks go by. But going up against Lompoc in week 2 just doesn't seem fair.
Mm-hmm. And it's going to be an interesting game, I think, PV and SLO, to see where PV's at, because Santa Maria defeated SLO 45-10 last week. So, if it's a little closer between PV and SLO, that might show us that, Santa Maria is really strong. So that's one to keep an eye on. They have common opponents, and then, of course, Santa Maria and PV are going to play later on in the season. So that's going to be an interesting matchup. And talking about Santa Maria's win at SLO, 45-10, Isaiah Garcia over 100 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns. Blake Truitt had a big game running and passing for the Saints. He was 6 of 11, 110 yards passing, 2 touchdowns. Also ran for 114 yards on 14 carries with another touchdown. So those guys are great. Had a great opening to the season. And last week I talked a little bit about how I wanted to see the Saints make a statement. And they did that with a 35-point win on the road at SLO. Obviously, SLO hasn't been great over the last couple of years. Probably not going to be strong again this year. But you can't mess around with anybody. You know, it's difficult to put a team out on a field and win, let alone dominate. So Dan Ellington and the Saints did that. I don't really care who the opponent is. You know, it's so difficult to win games at any level, especially the high school level. So 45-10 win at SLO is huge, and they're going to be at Santa Barbara Friday night. And Santa Barbara's coming off a loss. They fell to Saugus 25-21. But Saugus is a really strong team, and I think Santa Barbara's on the rise this year. So that's a big matchup for Santa Maria once again on the road, and you know they can't mess around with Santa Barbara. That's going to be, you know, a pretty close matchup. Looking at Max Prep's rankings, Santa Maria is closer to 400. I think Santa Barbara's in the 450 range. So Max Preps has them pretty closely rated. So I think that might be a tough matchup, but I think Santa Maria should win that one. I think they will win that one and move to 2-0. And then they'll come back and finally open at home the following week after, you know, 2 straight road games. So big game for the Saints against the Dons, but I think they'll come out victorious in that one. Blake Truitt's too much. Isaiah Garcia is a stud. Bobby Ruiz is really good. Kind of someone who broke onto the scene is John Rojas. Caught a touchdown pass. I think he had 60 yards receiving. And Jonathan Ramos, I talked a lot about him last week. He had a touchdown catch, and he's good on defense. Also can't forget about Frank Lopez. Had about 10 tackles. He's really good. Gerardo Zul's a stud. Gabriel Bravo's a stud on that defense. So I'm going with Santa Maria against Santa Barbara as they play on the road once again. Moving on to another, you know, big win for an area team was Santa Ynez's 65-22 win over San Marcos at home, and they're going to be playing at Carp on Friday. Interesting thing about Santa Ynez is where they fell in the rankings. They fell about 3 spots. They opened up second in Division 10 and move all the way to 5th after a 32-point win at home. So, you know, I know San Marcos is not that highly thought of, you know, after what they did last year. They're probably not going to be that good again, but just to beat someone by 30-plus points in your season opener and fall 3 spots, you know, I don't think that really adds up. I know the other teams that moved ahead of them and shifted in front of them did have big wins, but, you know, if you're going to put Santa Ynez second, how do you drop them after they win by 30-plus points? Maybe start them at 5th. You know, if they win, then they stay there. Don't put them at second in the division and then have them dominate an opponent and then drop them 3 spots. So maybe they shouldn't have started as high. Maybe they should have stayed at second. Maybe they should have been at 3rd and stayed at 3rd, something like that. But to have a team drop 3 spots in your poll after a 30-point win doesn't really add up to me. But, you know, whatever. They're at Carp.
I wonder how much of that is what's happened the last couple of years, though. They've started off so well and then didn't make the playoffs, yet they didn't lose many games. I'm wondering if they're just saying these other teams did well and Santa Ynez is going to disappoint us.
Well, the other teams that moved in front of them were already, you know, like 3rd, 4th, and 5th, right. And they had wins over teams that were, you know, about in the 150 range on max preps. You know, I was looking at that, seeing why they would drop so much. So they did beat tougher opponents. You know, San Marcos isn't much of a team, but, you know, like I said, I think any win at this level, and especially by 30-plus points, you know, should not dock you when you come to the rankings. So I don't know. It doesn't add up to me.
Sometimes it's hard to figure out the rankings when you.
But my question is, does CIF have a vendetta against Santa Ynez? Because you look at the last few years, and then they put them at number 2. Now they're at number 5. I mean, will a victory over Carp move them down even further?
I guess.
Well, they should have a victory over Carp. They haven't been that strong in the last few years, but I don't think there's a vendetta there. I think the coaches that vote may have been rethinking putting them up that high. But, you know, we talk to these people all year. They're hoping everybody does well. I don't think that's the right word, but I don't know why all of a sudden they slipped like that. It's just, like you said, it doesn't make sense. They maybe drop them down 1 spot if you go 2 to 3 because other people did well and they gave up 22 points to a doormat of a team that everybody beats. I don't know, maybe that's the thinking that they gave up too many points and should have shut them out. But it was a 33-point win. That's crazy that they would drop. They just they probably took the foot off the gas. They could have gone to 72 points or even more if they wanted to, but they don't want to embarrass the other kids or the other team, so they eased up at the end, and they shouldn't be penalized for good sportsmanship.
Style points.
Maybe the coaches figured they shouldn't have ranked them second, but they maybe at most should have dropped them a spot.
Here's the thing. I could understand a team dropping 4 or 5 spots after a loss. I mean, you look at Division III. Sierra Canyon was ranked number 1. They lose to Westlake. Now they're number 6. I can understand that part because you're a team that's number 1. You lose convincingly to Westlake, and now you're in the position you are.
Yeah, I mean, they almost fell as many points as San Ynez did, and San Ynez won by 30 points, but Sierra Canyon lost. But, I mean, I guess they put a lot of emphasis on the opponent and strength of schedule. Maybe that's it, but, you know, I don't think they should have started at second if they're going to move them down to 5th after a 30-point win. We'll see what happens next week when they play Carp. So who knows if they get another big win. Maybe teams in front of them will lose. I don't know. But, you know, they're 5th right now, which is okay. And we talk about these rankings. Lompoc jumped up about 7 spots. They were 10th. Smashed AG 44-7, and now they're 3rd this week. So there's a lot of movement early on, you know, with these preseason polls and stuff like that.
Well, that also shows the respect that AG gets. That when you meet a team with that history by that much, maybe you're better. Everybody expects Lompoc to be a good team, a great team, but that kind of a margin of victory, was it 44-7 or
44-7?
44-7.
That was a stunner to all of us.
Did
I
not
think.
lie.
Yeah. And then we've got the 8-man coming up.
Yeah.
I get to go to my first 8-man game of the year. I love the 8-man game. It's wide open, big gaps. You can have big running plays, big passing plays, and big scores. And Orchid Academy just killed Price last week, 59-0. I mean, just demolished them, which is sort of to be expected. Orchid Academy is one of the better teams in Division I of the 8-man. This week they get Flint Ridge Prep, which had an even bigger win. Wasn't a shutout, but it was 72-6. So we were talking about looking down the road to week 2, the 3rd game against Mojave. But this could be, I might start a tradition here of getting the closest games of the week. This could be the closest game. 2 offensive juggernauts are going to go head-to-head, and now the defenses are going to have to really step up. I mean, we'll pick Orchid Academy because they're going to be playing on their sort of home field, one of their 3 home fields here in Santa Maria. This week it's at Santa Maria. They rotate between there, Pioneer Valley and Righetti. Whoever's got a field open, they mark it off for the 80-yard game with a narrower field. But it's going to be wide open. I'm thinking Orchid Academy can win it, but this could be a game that is like 52-48.
Oh yeah, it's
This could be it could be 100 points put up between these 2 teams. It'll sound like a college basketball score when it gets done. But I'll tell you what, you know how we tweet the updates, and in a 13-10 game last week, I had plenty of time to tweet the scores. This one, my fingers are gonna. I have a little typing thing for my new phone, so that I can do this quickly. But I could be just going crazy with score. But it's going to be a fun game.
Yeah, a lot of scoring, and I think Alex Andrade is probably going to have about 20 tackles in that game. He had like 12 last week, so a lot of tackling, a lot of scoring, a lot of running in those 8-man games.
Your fingers will get a workout, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Moving away from results and stuff like that, we did have some breaking news today over in Paso Robles. Don't quite know how to feel about that, but Larry Grant has 1 game under his belt, and he's been removed as Paso Robles head coach. He was hired in January. He played college football at Ohio State, played in the NFL with the Rams and the 49ers, and started his head coaching career here at Paso Robles, and he's out after 1 game. Lorenzo, can you kind of fill us in on what we know so far with the Larry Grant situation?
So apparently the perception is that there's 2 transfers that came in, and these transfers are actually family members. One of them came from Sierra High in San Mateo, which actually played in the state title game with Sierra Canyon last year. The other one comes from Tracy, California. So there's that perception that maybe there was a mishap with the CIF transfer papers, and that's one of the reasons why Grant's gone. But there's the new reports now that Grant has hired a team of attorneys, which signifies that he's going to be fighting for his job. But this is now the fourth coach coming in to Paso Robles in not even a year.
Yeah, that's tough. Obviously you don't have all the information, but hopefully everyone works it out and it gets resolved as how it should. We'll try to keep you guys updated on all that. But for him to have one game under his belt and to come in and already be removed, that's not a good situation. And I'm sure there was not much room for a slip up or anything like that with what happened with Rich Shimke, being let go with the controversy last year with the video that surfaced and the team hazing and all those complaints that surfaced last year. So there probably wasn't much room for error there at Paso Robles. Maybe they're just being a little heavy-handed here. Who knows? But Larry Grant, it sounds like he will not be coaching anymore at Paso Robles. I guess we'll see what happened with his attorneys and how this shakes out. But Friday night sounds like when they play Frontier, they're going to have J.R. Reynolds, the assistant, is going to be the head coach. So like you said, that's 4 coaches in a little under a year.
And keep this in mind, it's by next year, Paso Robles will be in a new section, the central section. So you already have that dark cloud, and now you're moving into another realm.
Yeah, a lot of shifting and transitioning over there at Paso Robles. Hopefully they can get it sorted out and have a long-term coaching situation. I know hearing from players, nobody likes to go through coaching changes, and you got to feel for those Paso Robles kids after everything they've gone through, playing under a 4th coach in, maybe 8 to 10 months.
It's not fair to the kids. It's not fair to the players. No. I'm sorry, but I think sometimes these grown-ups could have done a better job of having their stuff in order so these teenagers wouldn't have to be going through this.
And you really have to wonder what goes through those kids' heads, and especially those kids who went through what they saw with Schminke. I mean, there might be 1 or 2 kids who are thinking, why am I still here when all this is going on?
Yep. All right, that's all we got for this week. We'll get back to giving you guys scores, results, and highlights Friday night. We got a lot of football coverage planned for you then, so we'll see you next week.